Uhuru na nguvu.
No. You looking at a free black man.
Talk Black 360.
You want to know what a free black man look like? Look at me.
Uhuru na nguvu. Welcome to another dose of Talk Black 360. I'm your host, Tino Blaine King, the Kool-Ray and Kush, the pioneer of black pragmatism. Today we have a guest in the studio, a very close personal friend of mine, one of the instrumental and founding members of the Kingdom of Kush, an instrumental part of the Kushite Cultural Center, my friend and comrade, brother Cedric Washington.
Uhuru.
Uhuru. What's up, brother Ced? What's happening?
Keeping it moving.
I hear that. So brother Ced, the thing that we were talking about a little bit earlier, you were telling me about the fantasizing of the movement and how people tend to over fantasize Africa and our relationship to it. What was that context?
Well, I think many times we kind of over romanticize Africa and our relationship to it, and it's understandable. It's a complex issue, our relationship to America and our relationship to the continent of Africa, and especially Western Africa. It's complex, and sometimes we oversimplify it, and sometimes we romanticize it. We saw that with the movie Black Panther. The one of the key, not figures, but groups in the movie. Correct me if I'm wrong with the pronunciation. Was it Dora Milaje?
Yeah, the Dora Milaje.
Yeah, they were. I guess you say taken from the Amazons of Dahomey.
Mm-hmm.
We a lot of us looked at the Dora Milaje with a lot of pride. And the fact that you had women warriors who were that prolific and that dutiful and that loyal, and who were unmistakably black and African. It was a great thing to see.
Right.
But however, the history of what they're based on, like all other histories, it's complex. No one thing or no one person is all good or all bad.
Right. That's in itself is basically pragmatic thought. If you noticed in the intro, you heard me say pioneer of black pragmatism. And I think that one of the most important pieces of me bringing in pragmatism to our conversation of black liberation is that we have to look at this from a more practical, from a more practical precept. But let me just inject this. Keep in mind that in one of his speeches, Dr. Clark said that it was necessary for all people to have folklore. And I think some of the romanticizing of Africa is necessary, because the truth is, to not say something and sound like Donald Trump, but there's good people on both sides, which would ultimately mean that there are bad people on both sides. Mm-hmm. So the pragmatic reality is that there are some bad black folk, and some black folks did some things. But when we talk about that, we have to talk about it in this context. We are dealing with a social construct and a reality that puts us under a social oppression, and we're unified because of the history that black people have suffered under this oppressive regime. And there's some discontent on both sides inside of black people, that some feel like we need to work to make it better, and some adversely feel we need to tear it down. Well, I think there's some balance that we find there. But what was the context of the I think it was the last surviving member of the slave trade. Right. What context did she put it in?
Well, she was the last. They've recently found out that she may have been the last known survivor of the Atlantic slave trade. She was a victim of illegal transport of the slave ship, the Colada, which was was shipwrecked right outside of Mobile Bay, and I want to say 1858. But the slave trade, the international slave trade, had been banned since 1808 in the United States. So we're talking about 50 years later. Historians estimate there were probably about 13,000 Africans who were illegally imported after 1808, and that's probably a conservative estimate. But she lived until I want to say 1936, I believe it was. And she, in her interview, she was able to give a vivid description of her life prior to being enslaved. Also, her voyage, or if you want to call it a voyage, but her kidnapping and being taken aboard and the Middle Passage, and also her life here in the United States. And one of the things that I found interesting was that when she explained to the interviewer how she became enslaved, she said that her village king had refused to pay tribute to the king of Dahomey. So, as a repercussion of that, the king of Dahomey sent his Amazon warriors, those female warriors who the Dora Milaje are based on.
Right.
They were a marauding army of enslavers, and she was captured by the Amazon warriors, and and sold to the Europeans, sold to the white men. So I found that interesting, especially in the backdrop of Black Panther, and how the Dora Milaje were based on the Amazon warriors, and just it's just an example of how complex history is.
Right.
You mentioned that there are good and bad on both sides, good people, bad people. I think a lot of times it's interests. If people's interests change, and they have to change depending on the situations they find them, because we also know that there were times where African kingdoms, including the Dahomey, they fought against slavery.
Right,
so,
right.
A lot of times it depends on your interests.
Well, that's interesting, and I think that it helps to bring out some of the philosophy that I think we need to try to embed inside of our thought process as a people. So the reality is, I think we have to accept the reality of a social construct as being the thing that unites us. And the problem that arises from that is most of us want to unite us through lineage, through ancestry. We didn't all come from the same ancestors, unless you buy into the theory of maybe Adam and Eve, or creationism, or original man and woman. I tend to shy away from those theories and just allow it to rest inside of the unknown. But here we go. There is a social construct in America that creates a reality for people who have dark-colored skin, melanated skin, and
we all have melanin in our skin.
Well, let's say those people who don't have pink pigment. So without having that construct that really is born out of slavery, I think you don't even have a desire to unite Black people. So the reality is we are united from the things that stem from slavery and our social condition, and the problems that we face in our social condition stem from that. So that creates the cause for us to want to unite and fight this system.
My question is, though, I tend to ask people, I'm not a millennial, but I always want to know why. Millennials, they have to have a why. Why do you want to unite? Why,
Excellent.
Why is there a need? Unite around what? For what? What are you're uniting for?
Perfect question. I would say, and an answer to that question is very simple. There is inside of a society, you have a group of people that are less privileged, and then you have a group of people who are white privileged. And inside of the construct of less privileged and white privileged, you find things such as the wealth gap. How can people function in a system that is largely based on economics when they are deprived of the economic system that empowers the people? So you have things that a lot of our brothers and sisters who live in some of these poor economic areas, police brutality, criminal injustice, the fact that fines and fees more negatively impact black people because black people tend to be on the lower side of the social scale, social economic scale. So all of these things brings one to the concept of wanting to find resolution to solve their problems. What culture is in my position in the first place, the way that we solve our problems and reward our accomplishments. So this is the thing that unites us. When as black people, we see at every rung of the ladder, we're being oppressed. And I think that is the thing that we can unite around and then begin to figure out what it takes to get us out of that situation.
What I find interesting, when you made mention, especially about the economic piece, and there not being as much or economic opportunity for African Americans or people of color, I found it to be very, very hard to convince some of us that we are in as bad a shape as the data says we are. Some of us don't actually believe that we're not doing well.
I go ahead, finish your thought.
And so that heads back to the unity piece. Some of us want to unify, and it's like, oh well, if we can just keep the police from beating us, then everything is all good. And we've kind of resolved it down to that without understanding why there's a police anyway. Why is the police force even in your neighborhood or in your community in the first place? Why doesn't that guy have a job that can support him and his family? Where have all those jobs gone? And so it's why is it that kid grew up with just his mother? What happened to the dad? What economic reasons caused that family to split? So I mean, we have a lot of different, again, like everything, it's complex issues. And
but you so in proposing that complex issue, you're answering the question. Mm-hmm. When people begin to ask those questions, there's root cause, and that root cause, of course, for many of us, we. Whether it be true or imposed reality, many of us believe that stems from slavery.
Oh, absolutely.
So when you realize that, then you start to put together the pieces of how do you overcome that obstacle. And I think that in itself is like the imminent danger. So, but you get those who are adverse to that concept, like you said, people who won't agree that we're economically challenged, and then but you birth victim blaming. So then you have the reality if they say, hey, you know what? It's not economic challenge. It's you, my man. You the problem because I did it. You should be able to do it. And to be honest with you, that's a very intricate situation because
it is.
The fact of the matter is that is a possibility, and that's what the American dream says. You have the ability to attain the dream. It is not a promise of a dream. But you can't say that my ability to attain the dream, my opportunity is equal to someone who has white privilege versus someone who is less privileged. So out of when you put it to the numbers, out of 10 people, what does that mean? That means there might be an opportunity for one black in affluence, but there might be an opportunity for 5 whites because of white privilege. So that's how we dissect that situation and bring it to a point where we can use it in our favor to advance.
Yeah, it goes back to your initial point. We talk about slavery and just the nature of the relationship of blacks in America to America in general. how did you get here? Why are you here in the first place? And those implements that are put in place to ensure that that relationship doesn't change. And so you have situations where people who have economic progress, it's due to lineage. And that's not to downgrade or denigrate anyone's hard work,
Right.
or their ingenuity, right?
Right.
But the guy who works at General Motors, who gets up at 5 in the morning or 4 in the morning, be there at 5 in the morning, and works till 7 o'clock at night, he's working hard too.
Well, you know what, so we've definitely touched on every solution over the time and let's say over the time of our desires to solve the problem. That brings to mind a quote, and you're much better at pointing these quotes than I am. But I don't remember if it was Booker T, who said that it's a society that values the doctor just as much as the garbage man, or something to that effect. It might have been Booker T who said that. So that means, however that quote went, what the gist of it is that in a society we should appreciate everyone's contribution
Right.
equally.
Right.
However, I think now that's just not a reality. Some things are worth more. So the value of the man shouldn't be diminished, but the wealth of the man would be different. So if you choose to pursue a career that returns less of a value, that's a choice. But that's where you would find more comfort. Now, there are people who become or force themselves into a situation of less comfort. And that usually puts them in a position where more value is returned. But that's a great service to society. But you should be rewarded for that service to society. So that's just some conceptual thought processes that I think leads back to what you were saying. We do have to kind of concede the point that we don't all see things the same, but we have to also think, why don't we see things the same? Because everybody wants the most that they can possibly get. I think that's a part of human nature.
Mm-hmm. I think again it boils down to interest. Most people have that interests are indeed selfish. How does we often speak about Black liberation? Well, how does that relate to me? How does that look for me? So and most of us, it might be we have different answers. We answer that question differently. Some of us are more to the left. They may be socialists, or some of us say, well, it's we got to get the bag, we got to get the money. That's how we defeat it. We got to get the money.
Right.
So it depends on your stance and what your interests are. And I guess if you can unify around those, then that's a very, very difficult thing to do, but it's one that we have to try to achieve.
Well, I tell you what, I definitely put thought to that. I don't want this platform to be just a talk show or just a podcast. I want to make sure that we're resonating with those people who've got boots on the ground, so to speak. Mm-hmm. And when you've got boots on the ground, like what we've discovered, there's a whole different dynamic of operation that you have to consider. And that dynamic is the psychology of the people that you have to deal with, human nature. Is when you're trying to move people, it's a definitely tougher encounter than just talking to people. So the platform that I put forward for Black liberation deems that it's a process and it's not a destination. And when I quote that process, that's what I'm saying, that this is not defining what Black liberation is, but it is the process for us to organically develop Black liberation. So one of those things is the interest of our people and attracting the interest of our people. So, as we were talking before, I think this might be a time for us to show how people are attracted. And I'm gonna gauge this and see what happens. So we've just engaged in a few minutes of somewhat intellectual thought and discovery. But what we were saying earlier is that our people largely aren't attracted to that. There's a few scholarly types, but largely most people at the end of the day, they want to get away from their problems, not talk about their problems and bring them in the into focus at a time when they feel like they should be able to relax. So let's talk about.
But I think therein lies the problem.
Well,
that's what we call escapism.
Well,
like we said, we were talking about the economic piece.
Right.
When you refuse to acknowledge that, man, I don't make enough money,
Right.
and you say, in order to get out of that reality of not making enough money, I go finance a vacation.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? Because you refuse to accept your reality, it's going to be hard for you to change that reality.
Well, but therein lies the conundrum, because the fact of changing the reality means that you want to provide a reality for yourself that allows you to take the vacation. Mm-hmm. If the vacation is the goal, that calls into discussion the reality of how much you really want that other thing. You want vacation. You're not trying to change your situation. Exactly. You want that vacation.
Right.
So at that point, you do what's going to get you the vacation immediately, and ultimately, long term, that sets you back.
Right.
It's just it's a reality. But the other thing you got to ask about that is how many people are actually supposed to engage in the struggle, so to speak, boots on the ground.
We would like for it. I think we would like for it to be a mass movement. You know what I mean? But I think that becomes incredibly difficult because, like we said, people have various interests, and to get people mobilized and moving all at the same time, man, that has to be a daunting task.
Yeah, man.
But I offer you this. This is something that was brought to my attention not too long ago, and I never realized that. It said the Cuban Revolution was started and fought with 12 people. Started by 12 people.
And then organically, the other people joined.
Right.
But you had to see, in that process, I think you had to have a situation where those people weren't diametrically opposed to one another in their philosophies.
Right.
So, and I'm saying that's basically what we have here is a concept where we need to make sure that the components of Black liberation aren't in opposition. And that's where the problem lies. Because nobody's going to start the revolution knowing that the people who are supposed to be their allies in the revolution are going to be the first ones that's going to attack them. And I think that's what most Black people feel when they're talking about the social construct we're in. Yeah. Black people are going to come to save the country before Black people. I mean, before white people come to save the country. Right. When Black people are involved.
Right. I mean, and part of that is just like we said, the nature of the relationship that we have with America. We're so intertwined to this place that, of course, that if something was to happen, a riot or some type of rebellion or any type of insurgency, you're going to have some Black folks who are going to be on the other side of that line fighting to uphold the status quo. Again, that's just the nature of the relationship. But I think we have to come to some firm definition amongst those who are involved in your particular group or what have you, or organization. Then you organize around what your beliefs and your objectives are, and you grow it from there. I think what we've allowed to happen in terms of Black liberation is the definition is very, very broad now, and that's intentional. That's intentional from the outside in. That wasn't something that was done from the inside out. The broad definition has become so broad now that a person who, I say this in jest, but a person who's a drug dealer can say, hey, I'm fighting for Black liberation. Don't you see me out here feeding my family, getting money?
Hey, but guess what? I tend to think that hey, look, that is not as bad as we want to make it out to be. For one, we have to, and I know I'm going to get charged for uplifting criminals, but what is a criminal? You know, you got a society that deemed the black guy that's selling drugs to be a criminal, but the white guy who gets trained by the system and becomes a pharmacist is a hero in the community. Now, you know, yeah, there's a lot of details in there that we need to talk about, but I'm not ready to just say that all drug dealers are a detriment to society. I'm not willing to say that.
Well, of course. I mean, that was just a simplified example of how broad we've allowed this definition of black liberation, the black liberation struggle to be in. You could have someone who's a billionaire, who people would say, well, he or she is exploiting the community.
All right. Well, here's the challenge. Why shouldn't it be broad?
Why shouldn't it be broad?
Yeah, why shouldn't it? Why shouldn't it be broad enough to encompass damn near everybody?
Because, as we said before, everybody's interests and objectives and aims and goals aren't the same. And if you paint everybody with the same brush, trying to force them in this box of black liberation, you'll have what we have now: stagnation.
Well, see, but I see that differently. Let me explain why. Mm-hmm. So if you paint with a broad brush, because here's the problem that I see with black liberation that is opposite of what you're saying. Mm-hmm. We tend to want to make a fine tunnel to pass through for black liberation, or for you to be considered being in the struggle of black liberation. If you don't wear these type of clothes, you're not really about the people. If you don't deal with these type of people, you're not really about the people. If you play football, you're not about the people. If you're a politician, you're not about the people. Man, you alienated everybody in your clan, so to speak, everybody in your tribe. So you're gonna be an army of one.
Right.
And I think that's what every organization tends to do. So I've got a completely different, not different, but I'm sure some of our ancestors has put this platform forward. We have to find flexibility in black liberation because no one has the answer. And what does that flexibility look like? It looks like a man doesn't have to throw away everything in his life to fight for a social construct. But you have to acknowledge the social construct. So you're going to throw away your livelihood because you happen to be a football player that's owned by what we consider to be a white supremacist organization. You're going to throw away the abilities that you've adopted from your ancestors of being diplomatic, so you won't become a politician because you're representing a constituency that is supposedly against our people. I think this narrative of black liberation has to change. And it's just like you said before, we don't have to fantasize it. We don't have to romanticize it. We just need to realize it for what it is and deal with it to bring it to what we want it to be. And I think in that case, we'll find some success, or at least more success. What do you think?
Well, just to clarify for a minute, I wouldn't suggest that, like I said, if you are a pro athlete, or maybe somebody who's very successful in whatever field you may work in, I don't think it requires at this point, it doesn't require you to throw everything away.
Right.
However, if you choose to unify and say, listen, I'm really interested, or I'm really about black liberation, right? There's a certain ideology that you would adapt. It may not be your dress. Everybody doesn't need to be wearing dreads and dashikis, because
Right.
We know that doesn't necessarily mean that you're interested in black liberation, right?
Yeah, don't mean anything. To
Right.
be honest
It
with
just
you.
means you wear dashikis and you wear dreads. That's all that means.
Right.
But however, if you move based on a certain ideology that you believe in, whatever you set forward as black liberation, right, that the accepted definition of liberating yourself or liberating your collective group from what you call an oppressive situation, then you move and you act in a certain way. It doesn't mean that you can't be a part of because you're a lawyer, you're a doctor, you're a pro athlete, or you're a wealthy entertainer. Because we've seen in the past, and we see even to this day, people who are in fact wealthy entertainers, doctors, lawyers who are involved, who have been and are a part of this thing that we call black liberation. So I don't think it requires you to fit a cookie cutter stereotype mold of the brother with the black jacket on and the beret, or with the dreads and the dashiki. I don't think it requires that, but
Yeah.
it does require the one to adapt a certain ideology in his or her life.
I agree with that, and I think that is what the conversation needs to be about. The conversation needs to be about defining what black liberation actually means, not telling people what black liberation is and trying to hold people to account of something that is usually determined in the mind of one or a few, and then trying to get everyone else to buy into that. I don't think that's how it's going to work from where we are now. In the past, possibly, but where we are right now, you don't get there from here.
Right. And like I said, I agree with you, but I will say this. The fact that the goalpost has changed, so to speak, and it has become so broad, again, that wasn't necessarily just a generic happening. That was intentional. It was intentionally made broad to, like they say, black faces in high places.
Right.
All those things were brought into the fold. And so, as a result, you have a lot of stagnation in terms of what we're calling the black liberation movement.
Right on, right on. Well, I think we've covered a lot of aspects of that topic. From time to time, I'll reach out to you, Brother Said, and see if we can't cover some of the issues that are the issues of the day, so to speak, and try to relate them to some of our historical operations and things that we've done in the past, and then look in the future to see how we need to adjust them. I'm of the mind that we definitely shouldn't be trying to do the exact same thing that we've done in the past, but in duality, I think that nothing is ever done twice because there's always a variable, and that variable is time.
Right.
So with that being said, I definitely want to find out if you got any last comments to make before we wrap up.
Yeah, I would urge everyone to engage in the process, even if that's being involved in the political process. Get out and be informed about people who claim to represent you in these elections. Inform yourself. Hold them accountable. Politicians respond to pressure, not praise. And once you find that person that represents your value, support that person and hold them accountable. Make their life hell while they're in office. That's your job.
Right on, right on. All right, and with that, you have two very intrinsic things of value that you need to do, and I'll tell you this time and time again: you must stay strong and stay black. Ashe? This has been another dose of Talk Black 360.
No. You will never be enslaved again by no man.